Yeah. So my name is Gordon Frank. I'm from Brooks, and I run an agency for Pioneer Hybrid, which is sort of an independent agency. DuPont Pioneer has these all across the country, and they typically get existing farmers, but sometimes other retail outlets and so on to sell seed. And so I think we had quite a bit to do with putting in the corn part of this this test for you to look at. So, and there's three parts to it. I've got more on the planting and the initial stages. There's one on weed control and one on more of the kinds of things that can happen to the crop as it starts to grow and those sorts of things with stresses and that kind of stuff. I was a district agriculturist with Alberta Agriculture for a lot of years. Retired and got an opportunity for the agency. I'd already bought a small farm in the Brooks area, so I've got 360 acres of irrigated land, and this kind of goes along with it. And my son graduated from University of Saskatchewan a couple of years ago, and he now works with us as well. And so we visit with farmers, sell a little bit of seed, and enjoy a lot what we're doing. It's a lot like being a DA with lots of kind of advice and interaction. Your backgrounds, generally speaking, who has grown corn? Anybody here grown corn at all? Yeah, we got one. He's from my area, so. Anybody would be interested in corn or curious about it? They've got some opportunities for grazing, that type of thing, for pasture. And whereabouts are you from generally? Around Lethbridge close here, or spread out? You're Pincher Creek, and got some Rosemary guys. And where else are you from?
Butte.
Picture Butte? Okay. And
Calgary.
Calgary? Okay. And the Rosemary guys, how about here?
Just down the road.
Just down the road? Brooks, did you say? Oh, okay. UFA.
Yeah,
All right.
we
Oh, good. Good. And
Lacombe.
Lacombe.
Down the road.
Okay. The Rosemary guy, and you guys?
Vauxhall.
Vauxhall. Oh, okay. And you're with Pincher Creek, and you're okay. Good. And how many farmers versus 1, 2, 3? Okay. Good. All right. Sort of gives me a bit of an idea, and with a lot of you not growing corn, some of this might be, I guess, relatively new to you. And corn does grow a little bit different than some other crops, so it's well worth knowing a bit about them. And you may have, people that are going to grow corn or do grow corn already and some things to help them with. But one of the things that first and foremost with corn is seeding depth. It becomes just really critical, probably more critical than almost any other crop you can grow. With some crops like canola, it's easy to say, well, seed shallow if you've got moisture and you get lots of good germination, a good stand. Oftentimes that's the best. With canola, it's easy to seed it too deep and not getting it come up at all. So you'd think, well, with corn, it's a large seed, you've probably got more flexibility. And you do have more flexibility to a point. But on the other hand, seeding depth errors can be probably even more negatively affecting what's happening. And the reason I say that, because here, like the first plot here, we seeded at a 1/2 inch depth. And that's really too shallow for corn for quite a few reasons. But one is because it is a really large seed, it has to absorb a lot of moisture in order to germinate. So especially if you didn't have irrigation and you were trying to dryland corn, you put it in shallow, and that huge seed has to absorb a lot of moisture. It's going to maybe dry out before it actually germinates. So here we probably had some of those issues, but they also tell me they had a bit of a gopher invasion. So this is probably more exaggerated than it normally would be for that sort of seeding depth. The second thing to think about with corn is that it roots kind of different than a lot of other crops. So if you have it in too shallow, your main feeder roots are going to form too shallow as well. And so the plant won't forage for nutrients and moisture nearly as well, and it won't stand up nearly as well when the Lethbridge winds come along. So again, that shallow seeding can be very detrimental, and probably more detrimental. We had one guy in our area that said to me he tries to seed shallower and shallower the earlier he seeds because the soil is warmer there. And that's probably true, but on the other hand, what's he giving up? Shouldn't he have waited a couple of days or 3 days or 5 days later and seeded the proper depth rather than go too shallow? So his crop might be up before the neighbor, but is he going to pay for it later, right? So there is a plant here that we dug to show you, and can pass it around a bit. But you can see the seed is right here, and almost, well, really probably truly it was about a ½ inch deep, right? So you do have side roots forming, you have some fibrous roots forming, but the area that they call the mesocotyl is basically compressed and didn't properly form, and so you didn't have a lot of the meristematic tissue, or the nodes that were supposed to produce roots under the ground. They've come out more at the ground surface, and so that plant is ultimately, if it did germinate as this one did, is probably not going to do as well through the whole season because of that. And kind of different than a lot of other, I guess, crops that you would find, and that seeding depth is really important.
You're talking about on the shallow side. How about what happens if you get on the deeper side?
Good question. We do have one down there at 2.5 inches, and again, for corn, because it's a large seed, 99% of the time it's still going to come up from 2.5 inches. And I mean, I've seen it come up very successfully even from 4 inches down if you've got mellow soil and the right kind of conditions for growth. But I don't know, the plant is going to emerge later from that, may come up more unevenly, and you know, in general, just be a little less thrifty from that kind of seeding depth. But I don't find 2.5 to be all that detrimental. I'm not sure. Corny Van Dasselaar is here, yellow shirt, and he also sells corn. And you're with, what do you call the company? Or Highland. So, and he's got a lot of experience as well. And I don't know, what do you feel about deeper seeding, Corny? What's the negatives of getting too deep?
Well, in my experience, the zone that you want to be in, depending on moisture, is from that 1.5 inches at minimum to 2.5 at maximum. And then, like you said, if you get deeper than 2.5, emergence gets delayed, and we're already challenging the season for yield.
Okay.
And it takes more heat units to develop. And we've seen Mark Johns worked with Pioneer for a while and did some depth checking in certain fields. And he could see the effects of 25 to 50 heat units difference from 2.5 to 3.5 and then down to 4.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions about seeding depth? Like, this is the really shallow one. We'll move on and we can add some more as we look at the 1.5 and the 2.5 inch depths. But just wanted to get you a bit of a concept of how important just where that seed is placed in the soil is. If you read literature on dryland, they will suggest in drier conditions, seed a little deeper. Make sure you get the germination. You know, if you've got challenging soil conditions and you are a little shallower, you know, definitely don't go any more shallow than you have to be into the moisture. But that'll come up a little bit as we go along. We kind of come down here to the 1.5 inch, and this is really what we're calling the ideal. And for some reason or other, even the ones that germinate there generally don't look as good as these. And again, it may have been the pressure from the gophers and so on, but you're seeing, if we were to measure this area in here between the seed and where these nodal roots are coming out, you've got the 3/4 inch, which is virtually textbook, I guess. Typically from the seed, this distance is going to be 3/4 inch. And then you can kind of get your overall seeding depth from the soil line down to the seed, which the soil was probably about there, and you're right on the 1.5 inches, right? And for whatever reason, these roots are definitely more robust, bigger, better, stronger. The plant itself looks a lot more vigorous, and you couldn't get it better than that if you were trying to seed all of your corn. That 1.5 inch is just very ideal. The other thing that is kind of important, and we'll bring it out later, but as Corny alluded to, when you get into the deeper ones, and this wasn't deep enough to do it, but you're going to get that uneven germination. And so why do we care? We care because corn, call it a sixth sense or whatever, but corn just seems to know if it comes up at a disadvantage to its neighbor. So if you've got only one leaf difference, or maybe a couple of days in emergence different, you're going to be taking a yield hit, potentially as much as even 20%, but you can take a lot of yield hit from uneven germination, right? So something that is sort of a runt early will probably always be a runt. When you walk through a corn stand and you see something this tall and something this tall, it's probably timing of the germination as much as anything that caused that. And the corn itself will not compensate like canola. Canola sends more branches, more flowers, gets bigger and all that. Corn can potentially put on a few more rows and a few longer rows, more kernels per row, but not near like canola. So you kind of get one chance with corn to get it right.
What you'll see isn't so much the height difference as the girth of the stalk, and it's like going down a 2-lane highway versus a 4-lane highway. And that's what drives the yield difference in the delayed seeding. The other thing to point out is that the roots that you're seeing prominent in that plant are the base roots off of the first nodes that are missing in that plant because they're going to be too close to the surface of the ground. Here they have the opportunity to grow, and you're getting that good brace, that firm foundation, and that's where you're going to get better standability out of 1.5 inch depth than shallower.
And what they say, like up to as much as 80% of your nutrients are going to come through that main root system, right? So if it isn't there, not only potentially being a weaker plant to stand up, but the feeding of it is just going to be that much better too. So a lot of reasons to make sure you're seeding as evenly as you can, both depth-wise and within the row spacing too, right? I think they're going to cover it a bit at some other places, but some of these may have been dug, but when you look at corn, they should be pretty much totally even with no more than 1 inch or so variability if possible, right? And here we're not bad. I mean, we got a few places where they've bunched up a bit and so on, but like here we've got 3 really close, and then we've got a gap, and then we've got some here. These 4 are probably close to ideal. So I'm thinking possibly that planter somehow had a skip and then dropped more than one seed here and then kind of went on. And we could spend a whole day on that. There was some planter clinics around Alberta the last couple of years, and tuning up the planter is extremely critical for corn, as it is with other seeds too. Now they're talking about, and we have one guy in our area seeding 1.8 pounds of canola an acre. I was in that stand 2 days ago. You wouldn't believe how good that looks at 1.8 seeds, but again, precision and planting and whatever. I'm not sure it's going to yield what normal seeding rate will, time will tell, but precision is getting more and more important. As I stood in there and listened a little before lunch, and some of you got the whole gist on the air seeders and whatever. But with corn, again, planter tune-up, having all your parts with minimal wear, and then using a proper, they call it fluency agent now, but reducing the static in the seeds, having your flowability as perfect as possible, and it is possible with the planters today. So when I go around to farmers in my district, the planting variability is huge. It's absolutely huge, from almost ideal to much less. One of the things you can do to get a bit of an idea of your plant count, and then you can look at the evenness within it, but 1/1000th of an acre in this 30-inch row planting is 17.5 feet. So if you were to measure 17.5 feet here and count the plants and multiply by 1,000, that's your planting rate, because corn is planted by the seed count. And there's the next section here is going to deal with that. So we'll probably should move on so I don't run out of time. But this was the 2.5 inch, and we kind of talked a bit about that. Again, the seed, somehow we lost the seed, but we got a lot longer mesocaudal area, and a lot of the advantages and disadvantages that we talked about there. This is a bit of a jump out of the seeding rate first, and looking at worked soil, planting depth 1.5 inches, and then a direct seeded situation, totally unworked, right, Jamie? Just went in with the corn planter, again shooting for that 1.5 inches, and just what's happened here. What do you guys know about direct seeding versus tilled seeding? What differences, not so much in corn, but any crop, any situation, environment, what are the advantages and disadvantages of tilling the soil versus not tilling? Soil temperature is going to be a lot cooler here, right? So if you were planting corn, we say you should have a minimum of 10 degrees Celsius. I mean, it would prefer to have 20, and then it's germinated in, what, 3-4 days? But at 10 degrees, it's slower, and emergence slower, whatever. But if you've at least got 10, and at least have the first water that it takes up at that temperature, it's going to be reasonably good to go, right? And we have people starting earlier, and it depends on how many acres you got to do and all those situations. But soil temperature is cooler. What else is, why would you?
I would say there's a couple variations here between soil temperature, as well as this year being a wet spring likely, maybe the little tough time getting proper seed depth, as well as a lot of the seeds likely drown if you had excess moisture. Whereas if you were to till it and first and get your temperature up by having dark color, and then it allows some oxygen to get into that so it doesn't drown.
Okay. Yeah.
Better seed bed.
Better seed bed, probably over there. But depending on the scenarios, I've seen good seed beds with direct seeding. You could come in with like trash managers on the planter. They do make trash managers for planters to sweep that trash away. Gives you a little bit warmer soil right there too, because you cleaned it up and warmed it up, but still not as good as without, right?
Trash can be a good thing, but it can be a disadvantage.
Yeah. So you're from Pincher Creek, so if you seeded this versus that, and you have a normal day in Pincher Creek and you're walking like this one's probably going to still be there in the evening, right?
Yeah, and also you likely getting frostbite on the ears too.
Yeah, okay, yeah. We have a few guys in our district starting to do this now. I've got, it's interesting, grain corn is starting to come in now more. And some of the guys that grow grain corn are livestock people who want to graze the aftermath after they've combined the corn. But the other group of people that are putting grain corn in is the guys that grow potatoes and beans, and they've tired of watching their land blow away. And they're saying, I can incorporate 3-4 ton of dry matter that's left over after the corn grain into my land and hopefully make that better. And one of those guys last year, he had the wind come and literally saw that right off 3 times, and it kept regrowing. And corn, depending on the variety, but somewhere's up around what, 15, 16 leaves or so, and you've got an ear and you've got a tassel and all of that, right? Well, he got his ear at 7 leaves. It looked like 7 leaves, but it wasn't. But that corn plant never forgot where it was. It blew off and it just kept growing because the growing point was still under the ground, right, till about 6 leaves. So he ended up with a fairly good corn crop, actually really quite good. The only place he had normal corn was behind the weed patches that didn't blow away, right? So what he did this year, he seeded wheat with his corn, and then he sprayed that first pass of Roundup. I actually got a picture on my phone if you want to see it, but I've seen it around Tabor and other places too, guys seeding wheat with the corn. Roundup takes it out easily, and they've got that mat and that carpet to protect it from blowing.
How
And
big was the corn when they sprayed
His would have been about 4-leaf stage. Yeah.
You're not worried about the competition?
What's that?
It's exactly that. Way too late.
Way too late. Should be
Because
sooner.
The whole issue with corn and proximity,
Mhm.
and I liken it to going to a funeral. Okay? Big funeral, lots of people,
Yeah.
right? It's not the person sitting in the pew ahead of you or the pew behind you that makes you uncomfortable. It's how tight we stand or
Yeah,
sit together, right?
okay,
Uncomfortable yet?
Yeah.
Right? And it doesn't matter if it's
Yeah.
it's just another plant. It doesn't matter that it's another corn plant. It's another plant that's close, be it a weed or be it the crop you're trying to grow. And if you're waiting till 4-leaf, okay, you're going to be too late because that wheat will be crowding.
It's already influenced the corn
Yeah.
negatively. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing about counting leaves, he's wearing a t-shirt that's wrapped tight around your neck, right? And they want to count leaves by the color. And what happens when the corn grows, that leaf that expresses itself opens up in the front, okay? Whereas being wrapped in the whorl, so when you're counting leaves, you're counting 1, 2, 3, and most people would say 4, 5, 6.
Right.
Right? But 3 of them are still wrapped in the whorl, right, and haven't expressed that color. So 6-leaf corn is a lot taller than people think.
Right. Yeah. And I think part of the theory is the guy wanted to have enough establishment of the wheat, so maybe you give up something in order to do that. And you will get more details on counting corn leaves, I think, in the herbicide one. But you know what Corny says, and there's also different labels you kind of got to watch. Some of them count leaves differently, so it's important, which I think Doug will get into when you get over there. So you picked out, my main differences in terms of, kind of no-till, not, whatever, depending where you're at. For a long time, people were touting no-till as actually making your soil better. There's more wildlife in the soil, more natural tillage with the organisms. Now some theories are coming back, no, we need some occasional tillage, and I don't know if Farming Smarter is working on that, but there is something to both, pros and cons to each one, right? But the other thing that may be happening here is your direct tillage tied up a lot of nutrients. There's a lot of organic material here that isn't quickly releasing, and so the nitrogen's maybe getting tied up, whereas here, with that oxidation, that incorporation, everything working, the bacteria working, the nitrogen available, this could be part of what's happened here, tying that up too, but it's obviously not near as good. I don't know, Jamie, do you have theories why this one isn't as good as that? Soil temperature, tying up nutrients, we talked about maybe not getting the ideal seeding depth, compaction.
I can guarantee that the seeding depth was right on.
Seeding depth was good,
It was
okay.
pretty good. So, there is definitely a multitude of things that were happening that is causing it, but it's clear that regardless of the situation, the plants aren't doing quite as well.
Yeah,
Sad part is it's still not doing well, even though it has,
even now.
Yeah, even now you only got 10% of them that's doing
Yeah, I mean,
fairly well compared to that.
if you spent $95 an acre on seed and that's what you got, you'd be a little disappointed, wouldn't you? Versus over there. So probably a little of several of those factors getting involved here, right?
Fairly significant gopher population that we've been working on controlling.
Yeah, but it should have been there too.
3 years ago for the first time. It's been a native pasture for quite a few years. It was only broke like 3 years ago,
Okay.
so we're still fighting the gopher population that's here. We had to reseed about 60 acres last year. They
Yeah.
destroyed our canola.
We can touch on it because I don't think any of the other groups will. I don't know if you said, I didn't hear everything, but this was canola last year. Any issues with that? What happens when you follow canola with any crop?
Your soil temperature could have been lower there.
Soil temperature could have been lower.
Microbes are-
Microbes, your mycorrhizae microbes and things are somewhat negatively affected with canola. We're aware of that, right? More canola volunteers too, which again they'll cover in the herbicide section. But thing is, what are you going to grow after canola, right? I mean, many crops can be negatively affected. Depends a lot on how evenly you distributed the trash and the hulls that are left and so on, right? It's controversial, but my theory is if you follow canola, just make sure your fertility is really good, make sure your seed bed's really good. And I don't worry too much about mycorrhiza stuff, because if I grew wheat, I still got a certain amount of negative effect. Or, you know, what are you going to follow with? You got to follow with something. So, and now we have better herbicides for the canola volunteers if you've grown Roundup Ready, especially. But that could be influencing here too a little more because of the direct seeding.
Yeah, but that was canola stubble too.
Yeah, it was, but it was incorporated.
The only thing difference is the way it was seeded, prepared.
Yeah, so mostly soil temperature.
Same fertilizer, everything else.
Yeah.
It didn't work for the darn guy.
Yeah, no. So mostly soil temperature and nutrient tie-up to some extent. I mean, nitrogen deficiency, what, you'd expect lower leaves to be more yellow, exporting, trying to, you know, I don't see a lot of it. It's generally poor all through, but
Fertilizer, nutrients, what's
yeah.
required for it?
What's required for fertilizer? I mean, one rule of thumb is a pound of nitrogen per bushel expected of a grain corn, or about 8 pounds of nitrogen per wet ton of silage is another sort of ballpark. So in this area, if you were expecting 130 bushels of grain corn, 130 pounds of nitrogen available is sort of ballpark, but
Same as barley.
same as barley. Well, I don't know. Do you use a different rule, Corny? I mean, I guess a lot of guys fertilize more than that, but that's sort of a...
The way I calculate nitrogen requirements is you take the dry matter yield of the silage crop, you take the protein that you're expecting, and proteins typically run in the 8 to 9 range.
Yeah.
Okay, so you take your dry matter yield times your protein, you divide it by 6 1/4. That's what you're going to haul off the field.
Yeah, nitrogen removal. Yeah.
But you're not taking the entire plant. You need to support another roughly third of the plant with the bottom part of the stalk and the roots.
Yeah.
So I don't
You come out
recommend
pretty
anything.
similar.
I don't recommend anything under 200 to guys that want to maximize their yield. So
Yeah, I was at the same guy that's seeding 1.8 pounds of canola. He told me he fertilized with 225 pounds of nitrogen.
On
I think that's a little overkill, but anyway.
How many pounds of canola?
1.8 pounds per acre he seeded.
Through a planter?
Yeah, like a planter, yeah, with plates for canola, yeah. Yeah, so we got 5 minutes. We should, one last, mostly this last one goes pretty quick. The main thing here was to illustrate air seeder versus planter. And they have different seeding rates, but the reality is the illustration's kind of the same no matter what. I've seen much better air seeder seeding, but it may have had something to do even with moisture conditions and all of that, not just the more random spacing of the corn, right? But from what we've already talked about with seeding depth and even emergence and seed bed preparation and all of that stuff, you can see that a planter pays for itself very fast, right? Now, having said that, I've got a handful of guys that still use air seeders and do a darn good job with them. And you can do a good job, and it's fast. I got another guy that's had his planter there for 2 years and hasn't had time to get it going, so he keeps using the air seeder, right? So, I mean, that's okay too, because he might not seed corn if he didn't use his air seeder. So he's getting the job done and he's doing all right. But especially I think if you're going for grain, precision's more important, but it's more obvious and more visible, but it's really there too outside of that. So any comments or questions about air seeding versus planters? Planters are made for precision. It's the way everything's going with so many other crops. We seed from here, we've got 22,000. I think the top end was 34,000? 32,000. On irrigation for grain production, we're probably at a minimum of 30,000 plants an acre. Lots of guys are even 34. For silage, 30,000 to 38,000 plants per acre is kind of where we're at. We've tried some plant density trials to figure out whether we're getting better yields. In my area, we haven't been able to prove it one way or another yet, but if you look at the literature, I think the higher seeding rates are paying off. Maturity is accelerated a little bit with that higher seeding rate for the northern areas here, and yields have been responding. Corn is a kind of a crazy plant too. Like in situations like this, you could get plants like these, they might have 4 or 5 years on them because they got all kinds of space, right? And none of them all that great. You'd much rather have one good one than 5 so-so, right? And they tend to take the nutrients from the ones above, and so they don't fill properly. So you can control that with even seeding and with plant population, right? So it's sometimes a really good sign if it's trying to make 2 because you've had good weather, you've had good nutrients, and maybe it is a sign that year you could up your seeding rate. But
One quick question.
Yeah.
Seed treatment.
Yeah.
You always do all seed treatment?
yeah, pretty much any
What is that
corn.
treatment for?
Pardon me?
What is that treatment for?
Fungicide and insecticide. So we're mostly after those seedling blights like, you know, Pythium and the sort of the whole root rot complex. And then insecticide to minimize any damage from, you know, even wireworm to some extent. Although if you're really after wireworm, you got to go with the super high rate. And any, gee, there's not a lot of insects really in our soils that are that bad, but so it's just standard on all corn to have it treated. Any questions? I think our time is done.
Yes. So if you want to try and catch Gordon at the end of the day after the last session, we're all going to rotate. So we'll have another 2 sessions, and then at the end, if you have a question that you didn't get answered, find any one of the 3 of them. But if you can help me thank Gordon for his time.
Yeah, thanks you guys.